So let's start here on the Discover page, and I'm going to look for a book here, and I've got Lion, Witch in the Wardrobe. I go to the book screen, and now I have this little status button where I can add it to my list, and that's going to create a list item. And so I want to make that button work. So that's why we're starting here with the status buttons. And to make that button work, I need to wire up this Add to List tooltip button so that when I click on it, we perform the asynchronous request to go create this list item. In React query terms, this is considered a mutation. So I'm going to come up here to the very top and add an import for use mutation from React query. And then I'll come down here and we're going to create a mutation function. So we'll call use mutation, and this is going to give us back an array, and the first element of that array is a function we can call to trigger this mutation, and we can call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it create. And the first argument to use mutation is a mutation function. And this we expect to return a promise that will actually perform the mutation. So we're going to need the client to perform this mutation. So I'm going to come up here. We're going to import the client from utils API client. And now we'll call client, and our API for creation of list items is simply list items. And then we want to post data, so we're going to send data. And to create a list item, we need to send the book ID that we want to create a list item for. And we have that book right here. So we can say book ID is book.id. And then because this is an authenticated request, we also need to send along the token, which will be our user.token. So now let's take this create function, and we'll come down here to our tooltip button for add to list, and we'll add an on click right here. And this will take a function where we call create, and we'll pass in the book ID, which is book.id. And just to make this more complete, we're going to accept that book ID right here, and we'll use that directly like that. So it's just two ways to do the same thing here. Here I'm being explicit about the argument that I'm passing, which is the book ID as part of an object, and then I destructure that object here and forward that along to my client. Now let's take a look at this tooltip button just to go through how this is all going to work, and we'll see we get that on click, and the tooltip button is using use async to run that onClick function. So when onClick is called, the promise that's returned is going to get passed into run, which will trigger a state update on use async to trigger that is loading state. So we get a nice and cool spinner. So let's go ahead and save this and see if we can create ourselves a new list item. So we'll click add to list, and it looks like it was successful. Let's take a look at our network tab, and we'll do that again. So here we'll click add to list, and we're going to get an error this time, and that's because we actually already have a list item for this book. So let's go back to the Discover page. We'll look for another book. So then we'll click on add to list here, and we'll see list items. And this is the request that we made to API list items. And this was our request payload. We sent the book ID for the list item we wanted to create. And then we get a preview of the response, which will include our list item and all of the information for our list item. So we are successfully creating a list item for this book. Let's go ahead and stop right here and review really quick. So what I did here is create a mutation with React query, and the first argument to use mutation is my mutation function. And here I'm accepting the book ID and calling into the client at the list items endpoint to create a list item for this particular book. And I'm passing a user's token along so this can be an authenticated request, and the backend will know which user to associate this book list item to. And from that, we get this create function, which we pass along as part of our onClick to the add to list tooltip button, which will call create with the book ID for the book that we want to create a list item for. And with that, we're able to successfully create a list item when we click on this add to list button.